Have you ever thought about what happens when a normal train ride turns into a nightmare? In this train crash documentary, we uncover the terrible accident that happened in Moscow in 2014. This tragedy documentary looks at what happened before the accident, how severe it was afterward, and how people tried to find answers in the middle of all the chaos. Join us as we talk about the heartbreaking details of this unforgettable train accident and how it changed the city so much. As of 2021, 13 million people lived in Moscow, which is the capital and biggest city of Russia. It is located in the far west of the country, 724 km west of Kazan and 629 km southeast of St. Petersburg. The Moscow metro system is a rapid transport system in the city. It is made up of an underground subway network and an above-ground monorail service. The Moscow metro is one of the busiest in the world, with up to 9 million riders every day. At the time of the accident, it had 194 stops spread out over 325 kilometers. Despite having a reputation for reliability, it had been having more and more problems with bad management, cutting costs, poor maintenance, and outages over the past few years. It is now the longest metro line outside of China and the 10th longest in the world. The metro trains use a 15-20 mm wide gauge, which means that the lines are farther apart than the 14-35 mm standard used around the world. In countries that used to be part of the Soviet Union, 15-20 mm wide gauge is a typical track gauge. Because of this, it's often called Russian gauge, even though it was created in the UK. The accident happened on Line 3 of the Arbatsko-Pokrovskaya in the western part of Moscow, just beyond Park Pobedy station. Before the accident, Park Pobedy was expanded in 2008, giving it the 4 tracks for 2 lines and 2 stations that were used by both lines. It first opened in 2003. The platforms of this metro stop are said to be 84 meters below street level, making it one of the deepest in the world and the deepest in Moscow. According to several media reports, a Facebook user said that 2 weeks before the accident, he had officially asked the head of the subway system to look into problems with the tracks. The user quoted from the email response that he got, "The tracks are kept in line with technical standards and tolerances. Since the gaps are the right size according to technical rules, no problems have been found with the mechanical switches in the joints." The 8:34 a.m. departure from Park Pobedy was on Line 3 of the Moscow metro system, going west. It carried about 1,000 people when it left the Park Pobedy station. The crash train was made up of 5 units, which were each made up of 2 cars, one with a cab and one without. The 2 cars share the center set of wheels. To run, you need at least 2 pairs so that there is a cab at each end. Each pair is 27.75 meters long and weighs 47 metric tons when empty. This means that the 10-car train that was involved in the accident was 138.75 meters long and 235 metric tons when empty. It is said that each 2-car unit can hold 344 people and can hit a top speed of 90 kph. The train involved in the accident, consisting of pairs 0210, 0766, 0765, 0764, and 0211, had started service in 2010. Since 2013, work had been going on to connect the Kalininskaya Line 8 to the Solntsevo district in southwest Moscow. This meant connecting it to the Park Pobedy stop so trains could switch between Line 3 and Line 8 at that station. There were points just west of the station that joined the northern track of Line 8 to the northern track of Line 3. These points let westbound trains go off of Line 3 and onto Line 8. But by July 2014, the interchange wasn't ready for use because it wasn't connected to the signal box and building work wasn't done. The 8:35 a.m. train from Park Pobedy station to Slavyansky Bulvar station leaves the platform right on time on July 15, 2014. It has a driver and about 1,000 people on board. The train quickly speeds up and reaches 70 kph in a short distance. It gets to the new set of points at 8:35 a.m., but as it tries to get through them, it suddenly goes off to the left. The leading car hits the built-up wall of the tunnel. The sudden resistance flips the back of the car around, and forces the leading car to go sideways into the tunnel. Following cars then crash into the growing barrier, piling up all the way to the roof as the first car is destroyed. The 4 cars in the back stay lined up and mostly on track because the 6 cars that used to be in front of them protect their slowing down. There are 271 injuries and 24 deaths in what is called the Metro's worst accident ever. The derailment also cut power to a huge part of the line. At the time of the accident, another train was stuck in the tunnel about 200 meters from Slavyansky Bulvar, and people had to be taken out. No one got hurt on that train, though. Early reports said that a power surge caused the derailment, but this has not been proven and is still being looked into. People on the train said that cars hit each other, with most of the damage happening at the front of the train. The first car, which is where all the deaths were said to have happened, had flipped over, and the cars behind it were piled on top of each other. Only minor damage was done to the last 2 cars that stayed on the tracks. Within minutes of the accident, a large-scale alarm goes off, which brings in over a dozen cars, several helicopters, and hundreds of people to help with the rescue. Most of the people are evacuated from the back of the tunnel and eastward along the tunnel back to the station they just left. People on a higher-up train also have to be evacuated because the crash stops its power. At some point, firefighters bring in hydraulic spreaders and heavy-duty cutting tools to start working on the ceiling-high plug in the tube that used to be 3 to 4 metro cars. This is after all the passengers have been taken off the less damaged parts of the train. Even though the leader car is completely destroyed, they actually rescue people who are still alive from inside its wreckage. Some of these people make it through the accident and are okay. The next day, the Russian Investigative Committee, SKR, starts their official investigation. They say they are looking into several ideas but are not suspecting any sabotage or terrorism. To try to figure out what happened, the detectives look at the wreckage of the train and talk to survivors and people who passed by the scene earlier that day. The Metro had a reputation for being very reliable, but it was pretty well known that it had been mismanaged, neglected, and cut costs in ways that didn't make sense in recent years. Several news sites report on a Facebook post from 2 weeks before the accident, in which a user said that there seemed to be too many gaps at track joints. The user thought that maybe the tracks were so far apart that the train derailed. But the Facebook user was told that everything was in line with the rules and guidelines, and there are no gaps that are too big after the accident. The new set of points should have been locked in the straight-ahead position because it wasn't connected to the signaling system or the signal box yet, but they had moved out of place, leaving their tongue between straight ahead and turn right. The lock that should have been on it was nowhere to be found. Instead, a thin, torn wire was pulled from the mess. It looks like the people who were putting up the points didn't use the required locking device. Instead, they just used a wire to secure the tongue of the points, which is kind of like zip tying something together. On 16th of July 2014, a senior track master and his assistant, who had worked on the installation of the new switch, were detained on a charge of negligence. According to investigators, they installed it incorrectly 2 months previously using a 3mm wire instead of special equipment to forcibly lock the switch, as it led to a yet incomplete tunnel. This wire could have failed and got the switch stuck in an intermediate position, derailing the train. Unprofessional operation of the train was said to have been another contributing factor, as the previous train that had passed over the switch 3 to 4 minutes before the accident had been traveling at a lower speed, and thus had not derailed. The list of arrests grew a few days after the accident, with Mr. Krugloff, head of the construction effort, and Mr. Trofimov, deputy head of the track maintenance division, being arrested in connection with the improperly secured points. Mr. Besedin, chief executive of the Moscow Metro, didn't get arrested but did get fired by Mr. Sobyanin, Moscow's mayor at the time, on the 22nd of July 2014. On 22nd July 2014, Ivan Besedin, chief executive of the Moscow Metro, was removed from office by Mayor Sergei Sobyanin. Besedin was replaced by former chief executive of the high-speed railway branch of Russian Railways, Dmitry Pegov, in order to restore Muscovites' faith in the metro safety. The trial eventually started on the 8th of July 2015, nearly a year after the accident. Proceedings concluded on the 8th of November of that year, seeing all 4 defendants found guilty on charges comparable to negligent interference with rail traffic and negligent endangerment of rail traffic. Mr. Gordov is sentenced to 6 years in prison, while the other 3 men receive 5.5 years each. The Moscow Metro furthermore sued the construction company for their damages, including the loss of the train, but was rejected. Moscow's city government, without going through a trial, published a statement during that time announcing that they would pay out 1 million ruble to relatives for each victim, and further, lower payments to injured survivors. Why exactly the construction crew chose to use the wire instead of the proper locking mechanism has never been publicly determined. As we conclude this journey through the 2014 Moscow train crash tragedy, we invite you to share your thoughts. What lessons can we learn from this incident? How can cities improve their transit safety measures? Comment below and join the discussion. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more compelling documentaries. Your engagement helps us bring more stories like these to light. Thank you for watching.